Shalom. Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We appreciate your comments and suggestions for the podcast. If you'd like to do that, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the Facebook page and also the main website, jewishsacredaging.com. It is a great pleasure that we welcome back to today's podcast for a return engagement, Rabbi Lance Sussman. And we're going to talk about book number 3 of his trilogy, the Sussman trilogy, Portrait of a Rabbi Historian. And this one is called How Did We Get Here? Which is a question that everybody seems to be asking right now. So Lance, it's really great to have you back. I hope you're well. And so this is the third book, available everywhere, the usual places, the usual suspects, and Amazon, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
So what's the first 2 books in which we did podcasts on, and they're archived on Jewish Sacred Aging. You go to the search bar up there at the beginning and just type in Rabbi Sussman, Lance Sussman's name. You'll get the first 2 podcasts if you want to listen to all of them together and have a flow. What's the difference between this one and book 1 and book 2?
The first 2 books primarily reflected my pulpit work, but I'm also trained in history. I stayed on after rabbinic school at HUC Cincinnati and earned a PhD there. And the third book reflects my work as a historian, which put me in a category that I don't know if it's an actual term or not, Rabbi Historian, with a dash in there. So the last book is different methodologically. I'm not just talking to people straight on from a pulpit or an adult ed. This is where I'm principally using my skills as a historian, using of documents, critical analysis, and then relating it to other historical works, kind of placing it in what's called the historiography of history.
So there are 36 chapters, as we were ruminating before we went on on air. The introduction of Dr. Sarna, another esteemed scholar, who I think is at Brandeis now.
Just retired.
The 36 chapters, not a coincidence?
Well, I had piles and piles of manuscripts and files. I have a person who works very closely with me. Right now we're working on a book together, but this previous efforts for the 3, Linda Barnes helped me gather all my materials, and we made 3 different piles, the first book, the Reform book, and the history book. And we were so close to 36, we kept digging until we got to double high.
Right.
So yes, I can't get, even though this is supposed to reflect me as a historian, I can't get the rabbi out of me.
That's cool. That's cool. And you pay loving tribute, rightfully so, to standing on the shoulders of Dr. Marcus, Jacob Rader Marcus, of blessed memory, and my rabbi, Dr. Bertram Korn, who was my rabbi growing up at Knesset Israel, where you were the rabbi and just recently retired. So these are great shoulders of great rabbi historians that you stand on, and lovingly and rightfully so, because as people who may not know, Rabbi Sussman is really right now, I would say, one of the preeminent, if not the preeminent, historians of the American Jewish experience, and especially liberal Judaism in the United States of America. So, kol hakavod, Lance. And the book, this is a really, really rich book. So for those of you in the field, rabbis, educators, etc., who want to teach a class in Reform Judaism, please make use of this, because it is so rich in its resources. For example, a period of time that we rarely talk about, the first part of the book, American Judaism prior to 1865, the colonial period, the beginning, the Hamilton period. I don't know whether they're going to sell the movie rights. What was, if anything, what was the distinguishing factor, Lance, in the American Jewish experience from the time of those people walked off the boat from Recife, Brazil, into as you point out, in the middle of the 1860s?
So this period before the Civil War, all the way back to the first landing of Jews on the continent of North America. North America was a distant place. It was a frontier where Europeans were just beginning to get to a frontier from a European perspective, and mixed in with them were Jews, very small in numbers until the end of this period, 1850, 1855, the numbers grow up to about 150,000. So it moves from first settlement to frontier to settled community. So by the time the Civil War breaks out, you have a settled Jewish community. They're in several major cities. You're beginning to see national organizations. You do not yet have the denominations that will happen in the next phase after the Civil War. So Reform Judaism in that context is still nascent. By the Civil War, there were 200 synagogues in this country, of which only 5 or 6 were either Reform or Reform-leaning. So it's infancy. It's almost embryonic.
And the Reform movement starts where?
So the Reform movement globally, of course, starts in Central Europe. A fact that's little known is mostly in German territories, but under French control. And that's like the city of Seesen in northwestern Germany. And that's about 1810. And by the 1820s, the seed of reform had found its way to North America, and it lands in Charleston, South Carolina. And interestingly, it was a Unitarian minister who read about the reform movement in Germany at that time, particularly Hamburg, and had it translated into English and published in a local newspaper. Members of the local synagogue there, Beth Elohim, read about it, and it resonated particularly among the young people who were looking for a more Americanistic form of Judaism. The people who controlled the synagogues, who in those days called themselves, ironically, a junta, said no. So they broke off and created their own little society called the Reform Society of Israelites, and wrote their own liturgy. It petered out until a lawsuit developed in the 1830s. They were all 14 years older, a little more powerful in the congregation, and then they took over the congregation itself after a legal battle. And then Reform really had a base there, and it was slowly beginning to grow in other places. But Charleston was really the birthplace.
Right. And if you've ever been to KKBE in Charleston, South Carolina, it's a beautiful building.
It's magnificent, yes.
Really. And the rabbi there is one of my former students. And so Stephanie Alexander, wonderful young colleague. One of the things that I think a lot of our constituents may not be aware of that you talk about in the book, in this developmental period, let's just say, is that there were in state constitutions prohibitions against Jews. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So the United States, when it's formed in 1776, and we're coming up to the 250th anniversary, which will be a great moment to review all of this, became, by, I would say, default, the first country in history, modern history in particular, but maybe since the fall of Judea in the year 70, that accepted Jews as citizens, as soldiers, as officers, as members of society. The Jews were not viewed as a class. So white Jewish men had all the privileges of the first generation of Americans. And this was actually, I would call that revolutionary. And then a fight will develop over time on a state-by-state basis. We get a federal constitution, and we have states' rights, and different colonies, followed by those colonies becoming states, had different views of Jews. And the sticking point was whether or not Jews could hold public office. That was the main sticking point. And Jews fought, the tiny little Jewish community, let's say of 1780, 85, fought relentlessly against any bloc in allowing Jews full access to their citizen rights.
So, which, off the top of your head, because you talk about, what were some of the states that had these restrictions?
So I'm sitting here in Pennsylvania, so I'll talk about what's closest to home. You can actually go through all of the original 13. In 1776, the United States becomes a country. Pennsylvania is an independent state and is compelled to write its own constitution, as were all of the colonies. They went from royal colonies or whatever their status was under British law to now American states under the Articles of Confederation. The states' constitutions regulated most things because federal law was so weak at that point. Here in Pennsylvania, a coalition develops between various segments of local society that in the very first state constitution after the Declaration of Independence said that Jews cannot hold public office. And there was inadequate opposition to that. The most important voice against that view was Benjamin Franklin. Once you get a federal constitution in place, in which there's an oath of office that says no religious test of office, and then the Bill of Rights, the states are compelled to rewrite their state constitutions, and they battle it out at that point. And in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, at Mikveh Israel, which is the founding congregation in this Commonwealth, they have a committee. They study it. They write letters. They go to the newspaper, and Benjamin Franklin is older and more powerful, and they overturn the restriction. And that plays out in different places in different ways. Jews had this problem. Catholics had this problem. And of course, then you have the massive issue of the status of the African slaves in the United States.
So it's always good to channel Benjamin Franklin here in the Philadelphia area, and Mikveh Israel. You write if I can say, it appears it's one of your heroes, somebody who I'm going to venture to say a lot of contemporary kids in our religious schools, and maybe even many of the students in the Reform Seminary may not be aware of, Isaac Leaser. Who had, you write about the Protestantization of American Judaism, and you're channeling this man. Could you just give us a little insight into who this person was?
My pleasure, because I was introduced to Isaac Leaser as a rabbinic student and made the decision to continue at HUC under Drs. Marcus and Sarna with a PhD, focused particularly on Isaac Leaser. Isaac Leaser was a German Jew who immigrates to America, settles in Richmond, Virginia. I had a student pulpit in Richmond, Indiana, right? So Richmond, Virginia, Americanizes rapidly and was well-grounded. He was studying Judaism through, let's say, the high school era, but not a rabbi. And he comes to America and quickly emerges in Richmond, Virginia, as a shining light. His work, writing, etc., is noticed by the congregation, the larger congregation at Philadelphia, and they bring him to Philadelphia. And he uses that position then to try and, quote, reform Judaism in America by intensifying Jewish education, by bringing in elements of religion in America, which is dominated by the Protestant realm and in Christianity. He translates the Bible. He introduces sermons, but all at the same time says he's not going to touch doctrine. So technically he is Orthodox, and because he is not trained as a rabbi, he won't change the rituals because he doesn't feel he has the right to do it. But in the meanwhile, he creates the literature and the model of a very much Americanized Judaism at Mikveh Israel. And from my point of view, it was his sermons which first caught my attention. He's really one of the very first, if not the first, rabbi, functioning rabbis, not ordained, to emphasize preaching. And he collects his sermons and ultimately publishes 10 volumes. And he viewed that as he viewed it personally as his most significant work. So my studies begin with a study of a preacher, the pioneer Jewish preacher in America. Right now, I'm working on a biography of Joseph Krauskopf, who was one of the most masterful Jewish preachers in the United States at the turn of the century, around 1900. So I'm starting and ending my bookends in my study and my career are great Jewish preachers in Philadelphia.
No, listen, I remember researching Krauskopf for my senior paper in history at Temple University. I was a history major. And I remember spending a lot of time up in the library in the building where I grew up at KI. And the people to read his stuff and to understand that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people would come on a Sunday morning, if I remember correctly.
1,000.
To hear him, and I'm reading this like in the 1960s, and that's going to be a great book because
I hope so.
You continue this great tradition of the academic pulpit at that synagogue.
By the way, I did read your term paper. It's part of the massive document base to this study.
Are you serious?
And you still get an A. You did a really good job.
Oh, wow. I haven't thought about it until we just talked about it. Well, thank you.
You're there. You're part of the legacy.
My God. One of the things you talk about a lot in towards the second part of the book, I think the rubric you quote is Race, Social Justice, and Roots of American Reform Judaism, 1824 to 1860. And you spent a lot of time, and I think you gave a talk at one of the synagogues here in Jersey a year or so ago around Jews in the Civil War. And the founder of Reform Judaism in America, the chief architect, Isaac Wise, known somewhat for his fist fight with his president of his congregation and his congregation, then moving to Cincinnati. But he was kind of like, he was, not this flaming liberal anti-slavery, was he? He had an interesting approach, let's say.
Well, you've pretty well made the historical statement correctly. The earliest versions of reform, as in the Reform Society, I would say all the way down to the mid-1850s, did not necessarily pay attention to what we called social justice. They were interested primarily in the aesthetics of ritual. And the same thing was true in Germany. It's not until the arrival of the other architect of reform, David Einhorn, that you get the first real seed of social justice. Wise was interested in organization. He was interested in being in charge of all those organizations, but he was interested in organization, and he had a dream of unifying American Judaism under a single flag, which was kind of, by today's standard, on the border between Reform and conservative. And of course, he would be the head of it, and that was his concern. When you get down to the Civil War period, he arrives in the 1840s. He is not concerned with slavery so much. What he's concerned about is with abolitionists. And this is where studying history really changes the picture. The abolitionists, by and large, were also missionaries against the Jews. And from his point of view, abolitionism was a real threat to American Jewry, and slavery, which is normative in the Hebrew Bible. No, slaves don't work on Shabbat. You have slavery in the Bible, right? Was not our fight until Einhorn arrives from Germany. And he says, no, fighting slavery is of central concern to Americans and to Jews and to American Jews. And that's the very first seed, I would say, of social justice. And it's not really introduced fully until the Pittsburgh Platform in the 1880s. And that's done by both the spiritual and family descendants of David Einhorn.
This tension still exists today. I mean, this in many ways between whether you want to call it the Tikkun Olam branch of liberal Judaism or the more spiritual, ritual, aesthetic, to use your term. Would that be a correct statement that this tension still exists today? Because I'm just starting to see a little bit more of it in classes around the country.
There is at least a discussion, if not a battle, going on inside of Reform today over the balance of what is the primary focus of Reform Judaism. Is it Judaism and its religious activities, or is it what has American Jews call Tikkun Olam, which is a mystical term, the repair of society? So are our feet planted primarily in one camp or the other? Do we try to straddle it? And this has been true since the mid-1850s. And I would say particularly in the 1960s, because of civil rights and because of then the Vietnam War, there was a shift toward the social justice side of it. And then there was a pushback. And now we're in the period at the end of the pushback, and we're trying to duke it out between Reform as Judaism per religion and Judaism as an agent to rectify the wrongs of society. This is an important defining internal tension in Reform Judaism.
Before we run out of time, I got to ask you about one incident that you write about in the book that I found absolutely fascinating. And again, in the classes we had at HEC when I was a student, this was never mentioned, even growing up at KI. But you write about this appearance in 1934 at a dinner by Albert Einstein. And you have some of the quotes. I found this particular section absolutely fantastic, somewhat prophetic. And I was trying to imagine what it was like to be in that room, listening and watching this man in 1934 with everything. Could you walk us through what that scenario is like, what that the passage in the book is like?
Yes, gladly. If anyone wants to find that article beside my book, it's in the Festschrift in honor of Jonathan Sarna, in which the editor said, find a document nobody's ever discussed and write about it. And we'll put and these are all the PhD students of Dr. Sarna, who just retired up in Brandeis. So I had been going through the archives at Knesset Israel, and in the 1930s minute books, I found a pamphlet on blue paper, and it was the handout of the appearance of Albert Einstein at KI for Hanukkah 1934. So he had come to America from Europe to escape the Nazis, had his position in Princeton, and the rabbi at KI, Dr. Feinschreiber, invites him, the leading scientist in the world at that moment, to speak to the congregation, and KI offers him an honorary membership, which he accepts. He doesn't come to services. I don't know if any other synagogue actually gave Einstein membership. And I developed a motto for KI: you don't have to be a rocket scientist to belong to KI. And he gives a speech in German, and it's also provided written in English. And that's what I analyze. And basically what it's a call for is intensification of education. Einstein was involved with the building of the Hebrew University at that time. That's kind of what he focused on. But his mere symbolic presence was amazing, and it showed you the importance of KI at that time in the landscape of American Judaism.
The speech is, I'm for the people who had not have known about this incident. So it's in the book, but I got to read you this one quote. He's speaking, okay, in 1934. But you could fast forward this to 2025 without missing a beat. He writes, "We are accustomed to lay too much emphasis on the differences that divide the Jews of different lands and different religious views. And yet we forget that it is the concern of every Jew when anywhere the Jew is hated and treated unjustly, when politicians with flexible consciousness set into motion against us the old prejudices, originally religious, in order to concoct political schemes at our expense. It concerns everyone because such diseases and psychotic disturbances of the folk soul are not stopped by oceans on national borders." Well, man, that could have been, he's saying that in 1934. This is why this book, for those of you who are in education, my colleagues in the pulpit, academic, shed a light on really a history that we rarely discuss. I mean, just that speech alone is a high holiday sermon, to tell you the truth.
My book is, and the article are the first places that speech was ever brought to the public attention.
Lance, before we run out of time, you have the perspective of history. You have served pulpits in New York State and here in Philadelphia. You've taught at universities. You're an esteemed scholar and published. What's your sense of where liberal Judaism is now, given the rise in anti-Semitism, the overwhelming concerns about the Middle East and Israel, the internal conversations about, autonomy versus a covenant, or, what's your sense? Where are you on where we are in this moment of history?
So I need to begin to answer that question by saying, in my opinion, in the modern age, Reform Judaism is a historical necessity, that there's going to always be a part of the Jewish community that needs a highly adaptive approach to Judaism to preserve it in their lives and pass it on to their children. There's always going to be a part of the Jewish community that wants to be both modern, and in our case, American, and be Jewish all at the same time. And the question is how to do it. And that desire from the people necessitates Reform Judaism. And it then becomes the responsibility of the leadership, beginning at the level of synagogue leadership and then up to the denominational level and the seminary, to figure out exactly what that equation is going to be about how do we have this adaptive yet loyal approach to Judaism, so that Judaism is a living religion to Jews, particularly in North America and other places in the world where Jews are seeking out that balance. And we are struggling at this particular moment because there are all types of countervailing forces that are complex, that are pulling Jews out of the synagogue, but they still want to have that balance in their lives. And what Reform needs to do, and it is no easy task, is to figure out what that balance is and then to give it an institutional, organizational expression. Those are not bad words. You need to come together to do things. I remember when I was active with Hillel, they used to say you can't do Judaism alone. You can't do Reform Judaism alone. And that's our responsibility as a movement or as a denomination, to find that balance today. And it might be a little different here and there, so that this modern adaptive form of Judaism will thrive and provide Judaism for endless generations to come.
Rabbi Lance Sussman, again, the new book, book 3 in the trilogy, How Did We Get Here? Thank you for showing us how we got here and for giving us hope for getting some more into the future. Lance, take care of yourself. Good
Thanks,
luck with
Richie.
this book. Again, available at the usual suspects, including Amazon, bookstores, etc. To all of you, thank you very, very much for your presence and your time in joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com if you have concerns, questions, or comments. Visit us on the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and the Facebook page. And there's a lovely little donate button on the website. And if you feel like supporting us, we really do appreciate it. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a shout out to our guru and electronic genius and producer, Steve Lubetkin. Until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning, I wish you much health, much joy. Take care of yourself. And most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom, Todah.